Do human rights activists share the interests of those they claim to represent? Some human rights discourse on the stateless in Kuwait exhibits bias at expense of its subjects, bias it claims to fight against. It is especially worrisome that this bias is expressed in the literature of key human rights players who influence other activist groups, external governments, and syndicated news services, collectively defining by media what the international human rights issues in the Middle East are on statelessness. Further, it can damage the efforts of stateless people that it sets out to liberate. This paper analyses the human rights discourse on statelessness regarding gender discrimination by Refugees International in their report Discrimination Against Women Creates Statelessness. It finds that some activists utilise discourse on statelessness in the Middle East as an opportunity to advance the rights of the more privileged citizen women and to claim wrongs by men towards women. Claims of exploitation and abuse appear to be based on presumptions and existing worldviews of the authors rather than evidence from the field. It concludes that the nature of this discourse impacts the way in which stateless women and stateless men are represented and perceive themselves, and potentially their capacity to improve their own situation. The gendering of discourse in the report subjugates the cause of stateless people to the feminist priorities of these activists. Stateless people in Kuwait face many obstacles, not least an inability to represent themselves as a coherent body in the international human rights community that claims to represent them. They have not as yet generated a broad claim to rights or participation that addresses the diversity of stateless people comprising the group in Kuwait, one which enables them to negotiate directly with government, and hence they rely on separate cells of support of members of government, activists, academics, and members of the citizen population for their advocacy. While a number of human rights campaigners and organisers have entered the debate on Kuwaiti statelessness, the content of reports vary widely according to the mandate of the organisations and the interests of the report writers, who are key stakeholders, particularly including Refugees International and Human Rights Watch, who are often quoted in the reports of other governments on the situation of statelessness in Kuwait and on judicial reports of Western democratic countries where Kuwaitis arrive claiming asylum. Difficult to get a clear sense of who stateless people are when they experience marginalisation by the countries in which they reside by virtue of not having their own government to petition and their experience, sometimes over generations, of victimisation. Despite these obstacles, members of the stateless community in Kuwait have contributed to the historical development of the nation-state. They have integrated to varying degrees in the smaller citizen population, and some have even enjoyed various degrees of mobility in Kuwaiti society. They have achieved varying degrees of rights and privileges over time. The giving and taking away of rights administratively remains a problem. But the government has shown responsiveness to their calls on government reforms during sustained protests since 2000, with 4,000 naturalisations announced earlier in the year, and the re-establishment of a modest admissions policy for the stateless at Kuwait University. Stateless people do not live in a vacuum. They are active participants in society in the face of restrictions to their freedoms, while restrictions vary according to individuals' identity status. There is currently no legislation that prevents stateless people in Kuwait from being educated in private institutions or from working in the private sector. However, I contend that stateless people in Kuwait are more likely to benefit from the international community reflecting back to them perceptions of their capacity for self-determination and their ability to negotiate alternative futures. The current approach involves something quite different. A persistent projection upon the stateless of Kuwait that they are singularly victims who require the liberation of Western human rights advocates. Such projection is a symptom of the rigid application of Western feminism that fails to negotiate meaning with its own subjects. In my analysis of this report by Refugees International, especially addressing the discrimination against women, the assumption that feminism provides all the answers for the oppressed, while admirably based on solid tenets classic feminist theory, soon gave way to just the bias the report writers claimed of others. Even worse, bias shown against stateless women at the expense of privileged citizen women even went so far as to promote the idea that stateless women cease procreation as a response to statelessness. What options remain for the stateless women of Kuwait? Here it seems the authors are quite satisfied with the solution to statelessness that they have interpreted from the woman's choice not to marry. Having read the subtitle at the top of the article and wondered about why the proposed solution just seemed like half a solution, as it did not address statelessness passed on to children of stateless couples, the whole solution is now clear. The authors suggest amending the law for Kuwaiti women only and not for stateless women in the subtitle because they have explained away the need for stateless women to marry and have children at all. The authors are not motivated to suggest other options for stateless women as they did for Kuwaiti citizen women, suggesting nationality law amendments. The authors do not suggest that women who have no husband or children to support them financially or to protect them in their old age might be rendered vulnerable to exploitation or abuse, and they did not make comments as to the benefits that marriage can provide, the economic, social, emotional, and spiritual supports of family life, stateless or not. Is love even to be denied stateless women? This takes the feminist line to the nth degree, where abandoning any hope for founding a family, tantamount to extinguishing the living culture, is portrayed as an equally valid life choice, compared to securing the emotional, social, economic and physical security of family life. It's a curious approach that privileges citizen women who are not judged for their choice of marriage partner but receive a policy recommendation to enable them to confer citizenship, while it diminishes disadvantaged stateless women for whom the solution to cease procreation is presented as a viable option, since amendment to the nationality law for stateless women is not imagined. Some readers might interpret this fashioning of feminist human rights discourse an ultimate conceptualization of discrimination against women, a challenge to the rights of women to motherhood, and the values that underlie the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Declaration of Human Rights of individuals who are not nationals of the country in which this paper examined the use of feminist human rights discourse on the discrimination of stateless people in Kuwait. The report by Refugees International, called Discrimination Against Women Creates Statelessness, published on the 17th of October 2011. It described where stateless people compromise their integrity while seeking solutions to their problems, including an opening in the nationality law that facilitates citizen women divorcing stateless men and the practice of obtaining false passports to claim alternative nationalities. I proposed that rather than directly blaming the government of Kuwait in ways that further marginalise stateless people from the nation in which it lives, that this only forces government and stateless people into binary oppositions that are unhelpful, whereas community education can increase the awareness and problem-solving capacity of stateless people that could better enable them to alleviate their individual plight while at the same time contributing to the development of a broader, comprehensive claim to rights for the whole group. It noted that Kuwait has already developed a system of adult continuing education that has contributed to the social capital growth of the nation, and that system could be extended to stateless people. With regard to gender discrimination claims in the report, the paper found the author-activists leveraged sweeping claims of wrongs by men towards women that were based on presumptions and existing worldviews of the authors more than the testimony of stateless women. The key premise of the report, to ensure that no child is born stateless in Kuwait, was put forward within a broader argument that warned stateless women against marrying citizen and Arab stateless men, while leaving open a suggestion that they not procreate in response to statelessness. This self-satisfying rationalisation ensured that the only stateless children in Kuwait would be born to Kuwaiti citizen women, whose situation would be remedied by amendments to the nationality law. This paper concludes that the nature of the discourse impacts the way in which stateless women and stateless men are represented, and possibly the way that they perceive themselves and their capacity to improve their own situations. Rejection of the discrimination of women over statelessness was appropriated to empower citizen women, but not stateless women, while steering readers towards the rationalisation that the only solution for stateless women is to cease procreation. This challenges the very values upon which the right to found a family rests, expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Declaration of the Human Rights of individuals who are not nationals of the country in which they live. The gendering of discourse on statelessness in this way subjugates the cause of stateless people to the feminist priorities of activists, well-intentioned though they may be.